Hi and welcome back to the Biotope vlog. My name is Chris Englezu from CE Fish Essentials, and I'd just like to thank you all for tuning in to another episode where today I'm going to be talking about the difference between Periphyton and Detritus and why it matters, what they are, and how you can incorporate these microscopic living communities into your aquariums to really get the best out of your fish. All right, so the two words are usually quite unfamiliar to the average fish keeper. If you're new to fish keeping and you suddenly get bombarded with words like Periphyton and Detritus, it can really feel like, well, you know, I like fish, but I don't like them that much. It's really not that complicated. In fact, it's really easy to replicate in your aquarium. In fact, it usually just involves a nice balance of action and inaction. So basically, just like many plant species, house plants that we keep, sometimes you can overwater them. Sometimes it's best to just leave them alone. I call it positive neglect. You know, the benefits that you get from actually just leaving your plants alone sometimes. And the same can be applied to aquariums. So when we look at these two different terms, many fish keepers would have more likely heard the term detritus, and safe to say most people assume that it's the sort of waste that builds up in an aquarium, and I suppose it's more or less right. You know, detritus I tend to think of as, even though it's never strictly a non-living substance, is a little less alive than Periphyton, let's put it that way. So detritus typically comprises fecal matter or fish waste or whatever species you have in your aquarium. They're waste products, dead pieces of plants, or, you know, leaves, dead bodies of small creatures, microbes that have accumulated and sort of typically form a layer on, you know, the decor within your aquarium if you don't have really fast moving water. And more or less this is the basic makeup of detritus. It's really not a complicated thing. Periphyton, on the other hand, is a little bit more complicated than that. So yes, it comprises detritus and all of the little waste products that build up, the dead parts of different organisms that are in our aquariums and so on, and of course the little microbes that find those things interesting. So those will be like heterotrophic microbes, usually things which are searching for some sort of organic matter to feed on so that they can obtain carbon typically, or energy in some form to survive. You can often get little types of saprophytic fungi and so on that grow in these communities. A balance of all of these things is never bad, but obviously too much of any sort of microorganism in your aquarium is always going to be problematic. Sometimes you just have to ride it out and allow things to establish themselves before you introduce fish. That would be the ideal way to do it. But in the event that you don't have that situation, which is common because we add things, we always add things into our aquariums to try to make them more diverse and interesting, and it's also great for enriching the lives of our pets. But in that instance, I always say to just monitor how things are developing in your aquarium. Sometimes if you get sort of an overgrowth of a fungus or an algae or whatever it might be, you can remove parts of it and allow the rest to remain. it's all about really keeping a nice balance, and I think that's something that I like about Biotope aquariums. It's in a very similar way to aquascaping, where you have this ongoing maintenance of all the plant growth and everything. There's the same sort of thing that can be applied into Biotope aquariums, but it's more so about how you maintain the biotope without really disturbing the natural balance, maintaining the different attributes of the biotope, keeping a biotope clean without, you know, destroying the build-up of all of these different communities and the decor. Often you could have lovely leaf litter on the bottom, and it breaks down, and then you put a new layer, and you know, maintaining all of that without causing damage is for me is akin to what aquascapers do with plants, and that's a really interesting part about it for me. But yeah, coming back to the composition of Periphyton, you do have these microbes that live in there, and often what you'll find is, in the same way as Detritus settles, Periphyton is a growth. It's like a surface growth on top of wood, on top of plants or rocks. Depending on your setup, this Periphyton community will grow in different ways. And you know, the great thing about Periphyton is I had a customer a number of years ago who was raising, interestingly, he was raising Uaru Fernandez Yepezai from the Atabapo River. So those are the panda Uaru, the common name. And he had a pair in his tank, and he really struggled to get them happy. And he emailed me because he had read my article on the Atabapo River on my website, and said, you know, can you give me some advice? Anyway, I introduced him to my article and referred him to very specific parts of it, and saying, look, revisit this, try to replicate the habitat, change the water parameters gradually to match more their natural environment, and of course the tannins and the wood and the I also encouraged him to change his feeding regime. He was from a background of fish farming, and so he is very much used to feeding granulates and such, and I said to him, you know, a lot of these foods are formulated for maximum growth in salmon or in the fish keeping industry. They're usually quite cereal based. There's a few good ones, one or two good ones, which you know, maybe we could talk about at some point. There's some really nice products coming out onto the market in the last couple of years. But yeah, I said to him, look, you know, once you've established a biotope for your fish, you've got these really high quality fish, a high quality setup, and then you feed them a food that's really a maintenance food. So I encouraged him to switch on to NatureKind, and NatureKind has a very high vegetable, fruit, plant, algae composition, so it's very green, which is perfect for Uaru. It's great for many fish, but especially for these types of fish that love to pick on, you know, and graze on green matter. So, well, at least purposely, not out of sort of ongoing desperation to find food, which is what most of the fish do. That's how most of their gut contents tend to contain these types of ingredients. But so I explained to him, you need a good quality food and everything else, and you know, we got discussing it. He went on to breed the fish and then was supplying them to some stores. In the end, he said, I've got so many fry, I'm going to change to a different fish because you know, they're too prolific. And that was an amazing story. I was really glad to have helped him sort of revisit nature. I think that's what it was. It was like revisiting nature, reminding himself of the fish and their needs first, and then benefiting from what they can give back to you. And you know, that was a lovely thing. But anyway, the thing that was really interesting that I was coming to was that he, as part of his fish farming experience, had done experiments with feeding Periphyton to fish as a sort of fish, an alternative fish food that wasn't, you know, was a bit more sustainable than a lot of the fish foods nowadays. And they had apparently shown fantastic, almost phenomenal growth, and had been very, very healthy. And he said they were growing Periphyton on the sides of bamboo sticks submerged into the water, and then sort of scraping it off and collecting it. And you know, these type of things that seemingly to us are so meaningless, you know, it's like dirty. It's like, oh, my aquarium's getting dirty, it doesn't look great. There are other people on the other side of the world somewhere exploring how these substances, these complex communities of organisms and their kind of their substrates can be used and have beneficial applications in the fish world, and maybe even beyond, who knows nowadays. And this is the beautiful part about biotoping for me. What biotoping does is encourage this type of curiosity, experimentation, and watching the processes as they happen, exploring what actually works well for your particular aquarium, this particular ecosystem, what small microscopic communities will establish themselves, and how will that benefit or not benefit your fish, and then what can you do about it to establish a more natural balance and restore some sort of equanimity in your aquarium. But it's wonderful. I think it keeps you more in contact with your fish. You watch them more closely, and the whole biotope experience makes you more attentive because of the additional behaviors you see as well. So more enrichment for the fish means more behaviors, more natural behaviors that you can enjoy and learn to understand. And it's really a cyclical thing. You give and you get back. It's really rewarding. If you have one of these, which is a fantastic microscope that I have connected to my computer, you can actually take a good look at some of the microorganisms that are in your aquariums. This is really great for identifying pathogens as well, and usually you should have a good collection of literature that can support you in identifying those things. But we can come on to that discussion another time. But yeah, so in short, I think the way to explain it really is that Periphyton includes detritus. Detritus being the sort of waste elements, the dead and dying, decaying matter, fecal matter as well, which is a substrate for certain microbial communities. And then Periphyton is a bit more of a complex mixture of all of these different things that form on surfaces, including living elements like algae and other heterotrophic microbes, and so on and so on. They form an important part of your ecosystem, and essentially, depending on which fish species you keep, act as a great food for your fish. So yeah, think about it, do some homework, see if it's something you'd like to experiment with. You know, you could even grow Periphyton yourself in another aquarium and introduce it to your main aquarium as a sort of grazing experience for your fish. Really depends on what your capacity is and what your experience, what experience you'd like to create. Anyway, thanks for tuning in, guys. I hope you all have a fantastic evening. Some of you would have noticed that I'm a day late this week. I've been incredibly busy planning a month-long conservation experience that we're doing in Cyprus as part of the Freshwater Life project. If you'd like to know more about that, please do get in contact. Be lovely to hear from you. And I'll see you at the next one. Thanks.